Hello, everybody, and welcome to True North Audio. I am Kiko. It's been a little while since I've done one of these. I've been working on the band's record, I've been working on personal stuff, and a lot of things behind the scenes for True North Audio. And a lot of the videos that I've had in mind have been ones that require a little bit more kind of work, like infographics and things like that, if I'm able to. So I've been trying to find a video that's going to be kind of quick and easy to make for me while I'm working on other things. And thankfully, I got a comment, sort of question, on one of the previous videos that kind of gave me exactly what I needed. In the video where I kind of made a sort of instrument patch or multi-instrument patch using multiple instances of Kontakt to create sort of a Franken kit, or in that case, just a single kit that had lots of outputs that I split over two different instances but kept in kind of one folder. I had a comment that had missed one of the details on the routing. So I figured I'd actually kind of revisit that and do a video about routing in Kontakt, and not only how you can kind of do it with a standard kit like, Get Good Drums, but even how you can approach it with other things that don't actually have output options. So pulling up Kontakt here, I have Invasion from Get Good Drums, which I used last time. I figured I'd start here and kind of go over another little trick you can use to actually get all of the kit pieces on one instance of Kontakt rather than having to put multiple in. In the case of Logic, you have a maximum of 16 stereo outs or 25 mono out, plus sort of weird combinations. And in Kontakt, you have 16 stereo outs, but depending on how you send things to those outs, you could also theoretically have essentially 32 mono outs, which would be more than Logic. So if you want to create mono tracks that appear as single mono tracks and get more than 16, like you would if you were just using the standard stereo output, you can basically kind of use a trick of panning different kit pieces into the left and right channels, since those will appear as actual single mono channels, and then kind of cheat a little bit. So we're going to go back to this menu and we're going to select the outputs. And now we have the output menu here at the bottom once again. This is the default 16 stereo that you get with Kontakt. Right now, this particular track is 25 mono, so all of these, when I create them in Logic, are going to be mono tracks. But I'm going to go into Invasion, and I'm going to actually route all of these to fit within these 16 stereo tracks. So first things first is I've created a multi-out preset for the kit. And all that really is that I have set all of the shells and the close mics to just a flat sort of even volume, more or less. And the idea here is that if you're splitting it out, you kind of just want to use that volume in the DAW rather than doing it in here. That's kind of the whole idea. So the whole point is the rooms and the overheads are going to be left as is. We're going to kind of treat that as that is like the kind of recording level, since there is multiple things in them. That'll keep the balance between those things based on the kind of default raw kit, but all the close mics are sort of zeroed out. So basically, like I said, you just want to start panning these things left and right. And that way, stereo 1 down here, this is going to be one stereo track. It's a left and right channel. It's going to show up as two mono tracks when I break them out. So if I put kick sum on the right, kick sub on the left, because I like the sub before the sum, as I mentioned in the previous video. And then the trigger on the left, I now have stereo 1, which I'm going to send both of those out to. And stereo 2, the left side of stereo 2, is going to be that third channel. And I'm going to continue doing this. So right, left, right, This is stereo 2, 3 and 3. Going to go onto the toms once again. I am going to be treating them left to right. So this last floor tom is actually going to be the first channel of stereo 4. And that'll be the right channel. And I'll continue to just pan these out so that they're fully monoed. Stereo 5 left and right, stereo 6 left and right. Come in here. Stereo 7 left and right. Stereo 8 here is going to be this ride, and this is where it gets weird, is it's actually an uneven number, but I'll show you a little trick with that in there in a sec too. Stereo 9 for the effects hats, that is already a stereo channel, so I just want that to be the left and right as is, and then that leaves us with 10, 11, and 12 as our overheads and rooms. Alright, speeding that last little bit up, all I've done in that last little bit that I've sped up is just gone through each of the different kit part tabs and assigned the rooms and overhead to their appropriate channels. So, we have stereo 1 left and right, stereo 2 left and right, stereo 3 left and right, that's our snare and kick. Stereo 4, 5, and 6 are all 6 of our toms. Stereo 7 is going to be the hats and X hats. Stereo 8 is a mono channel, and that is going to be the ride. Stereo 9 is the FX cymbals, which is already stereo. And then 10, 11, and 12 are the overheads and rooms. Now, you're probably wondering why stereo 8 is a mono channel. The thing to understand about the way Kontakt is kind of treating this is that stereo is just sort of the name of the channel. It doesn't actually mean that it is in stereo. It is as many channels as you want it to be. You can even have stereo 1 be a 6-channel 5.1 output if you really wanted to. You can get pretty creative with these. So I'm going to go in to stereo 8. This guy here. I'm going to click on that. We'll click on that at the bottom. So you see up here, that is the number of channels. We want that to be 1 because it's mono. And now you'll see here the channel assignment. This is where you want to kind of change things up. So if you look down here, stereo here, this stereo 7 is channels 13 and 14. Channel 15 is stereo 8. And then stereo 9 is 17 and 18. And you're probably going to want to change that. You don't have to. It's still going to work. You can get that little pop-up. Just don't worry about that. You could leave channel 16 unassigned, and there'll just be nothing coming through it. And that's not the end of the world. You just, don't have to use it. But if you want to avoid having a kind of dead channel in the middle, I would go through and actually change all these. So going through 9, 10, 11, and 12, again, you just click on it. If you click here on this, you can actually select it. Now the problem you're going to kind of run into, you see, it doesn't give you the channel number. But we do know that stereo it is mono. So we can look at this list, see the one mono channel, and just count from there. It's a little annoying that way. But if you select that, and then select the next one after it, and then you'll be able to check 16 and 17. And you basically just go through and repeat that process for the next ones to the end, which is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to speed that up, but again, I'm just taking stereo 10, 11, and 12 and doing exactly what I just did there with 9. So going through, I'll just double check that all the channels count correctly. You'll see this last little straddler, that's just channel 25. 24 and 25 are both dead. You could reassign that if you wanted, but there's nothing going on those channels. They're not going to matter. So you know now that you have all these channels. You have 11 stereo channels and 1 mono channel, which gives you 23 in total. Or of course, like I said, just look at the highest count. So you're going to want to know that for when you actually break these out into individual actual tracks. So first things first, if I play, you see the kick is the first 3 channels, which is the left and right of stereo 1 and the left of stereo 2. Snare, same thing, the next few. And so on, and you can see that the rooms and overheads are lighting up when I play the kit pieces as well. So now you know they're all working. It's all working correctly. If we press X, open up the mixer, that's the default key. If you have a different key, then press whatever that is. Down here, you're going to see this little plus sign. This is going to add all those extra little tracks out of Kontakt that you've made. Right now, because you are in mono, track number 1, the left side of stereo 1 in Kontakt, that is the current track that actually has the instrument on it. Which means that you're going to count out the 22 additional tracks. So, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on. And then you'll select all those tracks, including the one with the instrument. Right-click, create track, which will put them here into your window. Create track stack, summing stack, you now got your stereo back, although pretty much everything is in mono except for the rooms and overheads and stuff because we've not panned it out yet. The panning in Kontakt does not affect the panning on here because it is now a bunch of mono channels and will not be panned into stereo until you pan those channels. Now I'm going to give these quick and dirty names just to make it pretty fast and easy, but basically I'm going to rename these. You're going to have to rename these tracks, which is why I didn't bother renaming them in Kontakt, although you can do that in Kontakt if it's easier for you to keep track of. Alright, so I sped all that up. I had to add an extra track. I had miscounted my tracks. But basically what I've done is I've gone through and quickly named and panned all the necessary tracks, and you now have everything broken out into its own tracks. And you should be able to hear that all. Just don't mind me fat fingering all these keys. But you should be able to hear now that everything is broken up. You can see that all the faders are jumping. Everything is in its own channel. That is really probably the easiest way to do something like Invasion that's really big in multiple channels. You can also do it, because Logic has 16 stereo, you can do it 16 stereo as well. If you do it as 16 stereo, the only reason to do that would be to make sure that you get the maximum 32 channels. If you want to get the full 32, if you just for some reason are working with something that really does have that many mics, you can do the 16 stereo to match what Kontakt does. You'd actually want to take those, print them out, duplicate them, and then use your assignment on the tracks to basically tell the track that it's only going to be the left or only going to be the right channel of that stereo file. That's a whole other thing, and I can maybe get into that in another video as well. That's actually a really useful trick for a lot of things. You can bounce less tracks that way if you're doing things. A lot of guys will do where they do the guitar tone on the left side and the DI on the right, and then you just isolate only the left side or only the right side, depending on if you're reamping or not, and you just get stereo tracks for the DI and the amped tone and stuff. But that's the basic way to work with a high count of mics in Logic routing through Kontakt. And whatever other DAW you're using will probably have a similar sort of situation. But let's say, for example, that you have a kit like Turnigan, the one that I made years ago with one of my buddies. It's just a free one we have up on True North Audio. This one doesn't have output assignments for your faders. You just have a really, really basic user interface with the mute and the phase flip and the volume. You know, there's nothing special to it, nothing crazy to it. You can still actually multi-out this. Now, this one I've set up as stereo, the 16 stereo. That is what I actually have the instrument as here on Logic. You could do this one as 25 mono as well. I figured in this case, because there are only a handful of mics, it actually made sense to just leave it stereo and have stereo tracks and stereo output in Kontakt, and there's none of that like reassigning mono tracks or dealing with any of the pan. And the other reason is that you'll also notice there is no pan. However, we'll get into, there are a couple things that are panned within their stereo field, so some of them are kind of stereo tracks anyway. But you're pretty limited on this, and so you kind of want to get into the engine. So the first thing is that we're going to click on this little wrench icon up in the top left corner. That'll get you inside of the instrument, and you'll see all the groups, and you'll see the actual like editor here for the various parts, for the various samples and everything. I'm actually going to close those because we don't need those. We are going to go here. There is the instrument buses. If you open this, it might be closed, it might be collapsed, so you just go down 2 instrument buses and uncollapse it, and you'll see these ones are lit up. These are the 9 different stereo channels that all the different mics in this kit are actually routed to. So the way that I actually control the mute and the volume is through these groups here, these buses. So if you scroll down here and go down to this bottom right, you'll see that the output, it just says inserts, which is sort of the default. All of these buses are just going to the default stereo out. If I go to channel 1, also be certain to make sure that edit all buses is turned off, because that will mess with you. So I'm on channel 1. What I can do is I can click on this, and you'll notice that I have stereo 1. And it'll tell me how many channels are in stereo 1 too. Again, the stereo is kind of just the name of it. By default it is stereo, and it'll tell me how many channels and what they are. So I'll basically send that to stereo 1. I'll go to channel 2. I'll send that to stereo 2. And I'm going to speed the next part up, but I'm basically going to do exactly the same thing as I did with those 2 to the other 7. So now all of those buses are actually routed to the outputs. The first 2 channels, those are my kick. And you can also see that it's playing in the overhead room. Snare. The toms are the ones that are naturally sort of panned. You can unpan them if you go into the actual groups. You'll see the buses are sort of center panned, but if you went to one of the groups that has the toms, like Tom 3 here, you went to the group editor, you'll see that I have the pan on the group editor here. That being the group editor, I have the pan actually sort of assigned automatically to the right. So if you did want to change that, you would have to go into the groups. Check that in the group or in the bus. Sometimes that's going to be in the script, but if you're working with this one, for example, or if you're working with like Keg, the Keg has 4 mics, you would do the same thing with this. I do know how to actually create those menus. I can do it, and I have built a couple of instruments that do have them. I've not added them to any of the previous or existing ones, but I may do so in the future. For now, though, if you are wanting to do that, you can actually multi-out my own libraries using this same trick. And that gives you the same control. And then, once again, just like we have with the invasion, we go into our mixer. We're going to go down to that little plus button that adds the channels. And we're just going to add all the ones we're missing. Just like before, we're going to create tracks. Just like before, we're going to create a track stack. Just like before, we're going to actually name and pan them. And the only things that would technically need panning are the toms, assuming that the toms were actually centered. But of course, again, they were actually already panned. But you can pan them anyway, just for good measure. And that's that. So I have tongues open here. This is the tongues mini. It's just got 2 groups, and the reason I have this one open is because the 2 groups makes it a lot easier to demonstrate. Let's say, for argument's sake, that now this one does. This one is also still bussed out like the previous one I showed you, but let's pretend it wasn't, and you still want to multi-out. There are a couple of ways of doing it. The worst case scenario is that you're going to create 2 instances, and you can assign the output here in the instrument. That is something that I would go to if you cannot get into the back end of the engine and it doesn't have the options on the front end for any reason. That's not likely to happen, but it could, and if it does, that is a way to do it. That being said, if you're going that far with it, you're going to have to create multiple instances. You can just as easily create multiple tracks and kind of do the same thing, but you would basically say, like, this first instance is the first mic, and you would turn down the reverb all the way. The second one, you turn down the close mic and have only the reverb, and you can control them that way. You can do that in here and use this to assign them out and have one instance with the multiple tracks broken out. But you are running multiple instruments, and if you are doing that, unless it just feels easier or faster for you, I would say just create the multiple tracks and put a different instance of Kontakt on each of them. But you don't have to, and that option is available to you right there. But we're going to open it up, and we are going to go in and look at a couple different ways that you can do things. So first things first, if you've got a minimal number of groups and they're not assigned, then you can try and figure out what the groups are. These ones are named pretty straightforward. You have RR and RV. RR is just the standard close mic. RV is the reverb. You can kind of figure that out if you're able to solo the group. If you solo the group here, you can listen to just it and kind of figure out what it's doing. Now, because it's round robin, it's only going to play every other keystroke, but you can listen to that and say, like, that's a close. You know, there's no reverb on that. So if you wanted to, you would select those groups. You turn on those edit flags. That's what these guys are about. That's another one you want to be really careful of. If you're editing groups that you don't intend to, it's going to be a pain. So we have the group editor here active. You want that active. And then you would go down here and you have the output. And so you can output them to the buses, and then you can use the buses. I would do that and then have that as your default, resave the instrument and have that as your default. But if we go back, you'll notice that you can just output the groups directly to these stereos. And because you have 2 groups selected, what you do to one group will be done to both of those groups. And I could select and output the group directly to whatever channel I'm trying to output. And that can be quick and easy as well. But if you're finding that there are just too many groups, or it's just too much work to be hassled with, you can go through and, like I said, just create multiple instances and turn up one, have that whole channel just be that one mic or whatever, and you can still process them all individually. It's not an ideal way of doing it, but at the end of the day, the point is, it's very, very, very unlikely that you're going to have an instrument that gives you so little control over a lot of different things that you do not have some option or another to actually multi-out and treat it as a multi-output instrument. And of course, if you were to multi-out this one, you would do exactly the same as you have with the previous ones. This one's also another one I have set up as a just 16 stereo. The mics here are actually just one mono and one stereo, so you could do this as like 16 mono or something, like minimal mono, and then just do like first channel, go in and make that just a mono channel, and then stereo 2 is the stereo for the reverb. You can mess around with things like that as well. Again, just do it like I did with Invasion earlier. Hopefully that was helpful. If you still have any questions, feel free to ask. I hope that I was as clear as I could be there. I know I can tend to kind of ramble or get lost. I'm going to try to make sure this is edited as concisely as possible. But if you are having any trouble, just feel free to reach out, and I'll do my best to try to answer questions. And if you want to do this in your own DAW, you're not in Logic, really the only thing you'd have to look up is the how to create a multi-out instrument in your DAW and follow the same instructions and kind of play along. The Kontakt side of it's going to be the same either way.